So you mean that
My
people
motivation.
took something from a book, butchered it, and made it into a movie?
No, they didn't butcher. To be fair, I haven't read the book, but he's
I
the guy that
faced
wrote Andromeda Strain. Okay, so for people that just keep in, we're talking about Michael Crichton because it just came up organic. And the running theme through all of his works is we need to stop science before it kills us all. And he's a medical doctor. He understands science. He wrote a really fascinating article, if you can find it, called "Aliens Cause Global Warming." I'm going to go totally in the weeds here. Are either of you familiar with the Drake equation?
No.
Not by name.
The Drake equation is this thing where, only say one star system in 100 has a number of planets, but there are a billion star systems, so it gives us this % chance of having it. And of those, only a couple will be in the Goldilocks zone. So this is the percentage chance of that, which means, and it's this long involved equation that shows that there must be intelligent life on other planets. And it's one of those things that looks so scientific and looks so mathematical that people latch onto it, but is the classic example of bullshit pseudoscience for funding. Because every single one of those numbers at the time, I mean, we have more data now on some of the stuff, but every single one of those numbers at the time was pulled out of his ass to try to create mathematical certainty so that he could justify asking for more funding for SETI.
I love academia. I really do.
Awesome. So it's one of those. Well, Michael Crichton, basically, he's the one who wrote the essay about that is the kind of math that also came up with global warming.
Oh, the theoretical math.
Pulled out of your ass, and if all of our assumptions are right, and you throw the numbers together, it gets this really scary result. So give us a whole bunch of money so we can fix it. And I'm sorry, that probably just triggered everyone's button, and this is now going to be
so in the weeds.
And right, but it's one of the things you look for. Just because something looks logical and scientific and mathematical, if all the numbers in a mathematical equation are made up, then the result's not going to be accurate.
It can't be.
Or if it is, it's just a matter of luck.
So that actually bleeds off. That bleeds off into something very interesting that at some point we should come back to, which is the lenses in understanding training and preparation for pilots, and the ways that people are using numbers and the statistics and people looking into the footnotes of the footnotes to find out where the thing actually came from and what the study actually asked people and so on and so forth. But that's a sidebar.
But once you look at the footnotes, you realize that the actual numbers are bullshit and always have been bullshit, which doesn't matter. And this is one of the things I love what Randy King said about this. It doesn't matter if it's a 1 in a million chance. If it's fucking happening, it's happening.
It doesn't. No,
it's officially gonna be a fun after call, Malcolm.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. We'll come back to that later. Today we're here to talk about the overlap between self-defense and martial arts. So Paul put up something on the social media, and he put up a Venn diagram, and in one section was self-defense and one section was martial arts, and we're asking about the overlap between the two. Where do they meet, and possibly more importantly, where do they diverge? Miller, what do you think?
This is something we talk about all the time. There's definitely, in martial arts, if you're doing it properly, then the physics of it, the efficiency of it is huge. So, and that's well worth it, because if things are shitty, if you're overwhelmed in size and strength, if you're scared, if you're panicked, if you're trapped, you want to be as mechanically efficient as possible. It's the only chance that you have. So martial arts is awesome at that, but then martial arts takes the fighting paradigm and it assumes it's the same as self-defense paradigm. And fighting is consensual. You know what's going on. The person's in front of you. You have this. So you have that. So there's a lot of body mechanics in there that are fantastic. I'll flat out say that some of my best instructors ever have no experience with violence. But because they didn't have to deal with the emotional part or whatever, their body mechanics were incredible and made me a much better fighter. So so that part is important. And it's when you try to extrapolate from a tournament to being grabbed from behind in an alley, that's where it starts to fall apart.
Man.
But again, the body mechanics are good.
Paul, what do you think?
So I'm gonna agree, and I'll throw a little highlight on. I think we're talking about hands-on physical training in the martial arts. You're grappling, throwing, sparring type, the physical part of it. Maybe not the unequal initiative. I think a lot of traditional don't deal with that. So that's one divergence there. Too many don't deal with unequal size strength factors. Certainly a problem there. But one thing I having done this for a while, is seeing people get better at emotional management under duress, which is very helpful. Get better with, one of the things I always say, because I know I dealt with it and I've seen a lot of other people deal with it, is like the increasing level of permissions. I'm going to give myself permission to do X, Y, and Z. And that is definitely a growth mindset that takes time for a lot of people to deal with. I have not seen, prior to working with certain people, a whole lot of active drilling in escape and evasion, unfortunately, which there's a lot of talking about it, not a lot of doing of it. In some cases, not even a lot of talking about it. So that could be one issue. Mr. Rivers?
So I'm assuming we're talking about physical training in martial arts as well. I think Paul pointed that out. For me, the overlap is really entirely dependent on the intent and the skill level of the teacher. Because I would argue that when I first got to martial arts, right, I started out and I was, when I first sort of chose to get into it, when it wasn't imposed upon me, I started out looking for something that was practical, straightforward, and was devoid of all the philosophical stuff. I didn't want to be on a path to being a better person. I just wanted to be better at handling certain circumstances. And it's weird because you could make an argument that when you talk about the holistic elements of training for self-defense, developing the ability to recognize dynamics, developing the ability to control yourself, to recognize when it's time to go and when it's not, a lot of that indirectly could be covered by these sort of philosophical and woo-woo elements if they were done well. Done well, it would impart maturity, which would cover a lot of these problems. Most people, what they're really going to deal with is stuff that stems from them being ignorant. And I don't mean ignorant in the colloquial sense, literally not knowing what's going on, or them being rude or purposefully kind of a dick. Theoretically, if the philosophical elements of martial arts cover all that, they help manage almost all of the social stuff and potentially portions of the predatory stuff, because you present somewhat differently. If you are comfortable with yourself, if you can wait in stillness, if you don't have that anxiety that makes predators better at what they do, you could manage the predatory elements more easily, but it would depend in huge amounts on the intention of the teacher. Because if the teacher is recognizing those potential benefits, then they can enhance them. But if the teacher is doing something else with it or not doing anything with it, it's harder. So I think the overlap really varies on how good a teacher you have, what their intention is, and how much you invest in, ideally, and again, I'm really rose-colored glassesing the martial arts piece, how much you invest in like the self-development portions, because a lot of the stuff that actually protects people is about them being solid people, not just capable.
Yeah, I'm going to point in the direction of a rabbit hole, but I don't want to open it. Because we'll be talking about that for the next hour. So it's possible to have an instructor that understands that,
Hmm.
but is a crappy instructor, as
Yeah,
opposed to an instructor who's a good instructor but doesn't understand that.
very
Uh,
true.
so, and that's one of those. So this dichotomy between a good instructor who may or may not be a good person and someone who's a generally good person who happens to be an instructor who may or may not be a good instructor.
Yep.
And you see why this turned into a huge rabbit hole.
Yes.
Well, that's
It's
now my next follow-up. I think we already have next week's topic of so what do you look for if you have self-defense concerns and you're looking around for martial arts schools?
yeah. I think the overlap also depends a lot on the interpretation. So correct me if I'm wrong. You guys have the better background in traditional styles, but as far as I understand it, a lot of the problem wasn't that the traditional stuff didn't work. It's that people didn't understand what they were doing. So they're thinking that they're solving X problem when this was really designed to do Y. And so I think that could arguably be applied to a broader range of pieces of martial arts than just the physical. So maybe if people better understood that this thing was supposed to be a metaphor and not being taken literally, you would have more of that element. That said, we do have to also remember that in context, a lot of this stuff is built for battlefields where you were choosing to be there, and or at least to some degree of choice. Not necessarily, maybe you were
Kind of.
kind of.
People are weird, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, just a
one
little.
thing I loved about judo was that my initial judo instructors said explicitly, this is not self-defense.
Mm,
It's something we're training to beat other people at judo competitions.
mhm.
There's self-defense things in there that will work. If you can throw someone who's trained, you can throw someone who's untrained.
Mhm.
Much easier. So they were explicit about that, and I loved it because it said, you can use this stuff, but don't think that's what it is. With the moral and ethical, there's something similar, and this would be especially fun for Malcolm and I to drink and talk about. But one of the things, we all have this assumption that other cultures, and this is endemic in Japanese stylists, that other cultures have a deeper moral understanding than we do. So the samurai were this paragon of chivalry. It's like, Bushido was invented way after the samurai era by a Christian Japanese and just completely fucking made up, had nothing to do with it. Chivalry was made up after that era as a way to kind of keep some control on some people who had learned that you get a whole bunch of shit by killing people. And so we have these ethical
Always
things.
goes down to population control, doesn't it?
And there, well, and so it gets into, there are, in my opinion, a handful of honest to God fucking good people. And I like them, and I try to emulate them, and I try to be like them. And but it's a shitload of hard work. There are a whole bunch of people, and it's much easier right now to play bad boy. And just as certain women are attracted to bad boys, so are like 90% of people want to be martial arts students.
Mm.
It's and if you wanted, that's another rabbit hole you don't want to dig down too much. You can start very quick. So I can learn from people that suck, who are just despicable human beings, but I can learn a lot from them because, again, their mechanics may be good, they may understand some things, but that's not who I want to be, and that's not who I want to hang with.
Yeah.
Third topic seminar just came up.
What?
Horrible seminars that you actually learn something at.
Yeah.
I've learned, and that's the problem. Like, I've learned a bunch from people that I don't want to necessarily be a whole lot like. And then it begs the question, if martial arts is teaching a style, you are passing down information in a very specific way. You're teaching information rather than teaching students. Is there a lower level of moral obligation when you are teaching material versus when you're teaching people?
I think that if you put in your head that there is such a thing as a lower level of moral obligation, then you're already making excuses to be an asshole. Maybe. Yeah. is it okay to be a bad guy when you're already looking for a reason to be a bad guy?
I don't know.
Oh, Malcolm is spinning.
No, because I'm thinking about this. Like, if I'm here to teach material, and again, I'm not talking about like me or any specific material. Just in general, if the only job is to teach the material, whereas in self-defense, the underlying assumption is that this person is vulnerable because they came in. Is there a different standard? Or is it just, it's all the same?
I'm going to attack the basic assumption. We talked about teaching for ego, teaching for the student, teaching the material.
Yeah.
But realistically, I don't think there's a single person in the world that teaches the material to teach the material. They're either doing it for the ego or they're doing it for the students.
Enter all law enforcement tactics.
Only a robot could just teach the material without caring about their own ego or about the
student. That's fair.
Okay, 6:01. So we will continue the conversation. This is gonna be a fun one tonight, clearly. So we're gonna be continuing the conversation in our private chat, but private means $10 a month. You get to join and come have the next hour and a half, typically conversation with the three of us, sometimes Tammy, and a whole bunch of other people that are in the Chiron Patreon group. So thank you guys. I will shut down the live now. We'll see everybody in the private.